fine.
That's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
We're not sure if a reporter from the Brown and White is attending.
Okay.
Jack, it's Jake?
Jake.
I'm so sorry. Jake is from the Brown and White too, but he's just doing video for their digital
I see.
output.
Got it.
So maybe if we could just wait a moment, if that's okay?
Yeah, no problem.
How's your day been going so far?
Very nicely, thank you. You know, no problems.
Did you
Being well taken care of.
Yeah.
Coddled, I'm being coddled.
Well, isn't that nice to come back to your own water and,
It is, you know.
Yeah.
I've been back a few times, so. I've been back since I was back once since commencement, journalism thing. Right, that was the journalism thing. The Craig Gordon thing. The class, if you recall.
Right, yeah, that was in the, was that in the winter or the fall?
I think it was in the winter, yeah, I'm not sure. I remember. I don't know, it's hard to remember.
how far of a drive is it from DC?
To get here,
It's a train, it's about.
well, the drive, well, we didn't drive.
If you, they didn't drive, but that's about a.
It's
easy
4 hour,
4 hour drive.
4 hours to get here, I think. It would be 4 hours, yeah. A long time, too long.
Well, thanks for coming back.
Thank you for
Have you
having
heard
me.
from Craig lately?
A little bit. I actually have an email from him. I have no idea what he's talking about,
Oh.
but I just had to ask him what he's
I
talking
just
about.
looked at that. She said it's just
He's living in Oregon.
no one else.
No.
Seems to be happy.
I saw him out, we were out in, with John Simon in San Francisco and LA in
When was that?
late October, and he was at the San Francisco.
In October? Oh, really? I thought he'd moved by then.
Well, he had moved, but.
He was just
He
there?
was there.
I see. Maybe he was seeing his, I don't know, kids.
He
or-
gave me a copy of a planned curriculum for
I think he's just
artificial
he's videoing
intelligence
your
and
interaction
journalism or something.
so that he can post it.
Is he talking
on-
about
I don't know, I can't keep up with Craig. It's impossible.
Is that okay?
He's thinking 100 miles, 150 miles an hour
Oh, yeah, he has an idea.
An exclusive.
a minute. Yeah, I know. I can't keep up with it.
Well, my English is a little bit awkward.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Yes.
I think he's gonna come back in the fall
fact,
and teach.
If you want. Do you
Is
want
he
to
for
sit
sure?
closer?
I have no
I
idea.
don't think it's for sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Ah,
Yeah.
it's so, could you read
You want me to read the questions?
the, yeah, okay.
I can do that.
It's more
Okay.
better for you, better for him.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you introduce yourself again and say your name?
Yeah, my name is We-Jae. I'm from South Korea.
Right.
I'm working for the South Korean newspaper company.
Right.
Did you hear about the Joseon Daily News?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm working for the Joseon Daily News.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay,
Sure.
so he has just asked me if I could read the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, but you want me to look, which way do you want me to look? This way or that way? This way, right? Probably.
We thought that since it is this gentleman solely getting an exclusive, that
Right.
it would just be the two of you and
Like
have
a
more intimate
conversation.
right here. Yes.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so if I could ask you to move to the right now,
Okay.
so that you're centered in front of the banners. Thank you so much.
Are we good? Okay.
You want to sit right
So,
here?
Okay, yeah.
so when you're asking the questions, I will look at you.
Okay.
Yes,
right.
in fact, I probably shouldn't even be in the
Can
picture.
I move this?
Yeah.
Well,
You want to move this out of?
I should take my picture. Okay.
You ready?
Yep, ready.
Okay.
Go.
I have not read these before, so pardon me.
No problem.
When you read the column about the sexual abuse of a Boston parish, you said you felt there was a story, and there was a story. Did you expect it would be this huge when you assigned the story to the Spotlight team?
I really didn't know. We were just pursuing a story, and there were some facts that we needed to get. We needed to find out what the truth was, but we had no idea how big this story would become. At the time, we were looking at the case of one priest who had been accused of abusing as many as 80 children. It turned out that we were able to determine that there was a pattern of dozens upon dozens of priests who had abused children and repeatedly, and that their cases were covered up by the Catholic Church. We had no idea at the time that this would become a national story, that this would become an international story, and that till this day, the Vatican would be dealing with this issue.
So I mean, at the time, did you feel like just journalistic sense or feeling of that?
Yeah, people have asked me, why did you decide to go after
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Catholic Church at the time? And the answer is that I didn't decide to go after the Catholic Church. I decided to pursue a story. It was a journalistic impulse. There was a story in front of us. We didn't know all the facts. We needed to determine all the facts. That was our job as journalists, and so that's what I wanted us to do.
So why did your co-workers not feel about that? I mean, except you, anybody in your company doesn't feel about your journalistic sense?
Well, I would think there was concern because earlier, before I had arrived at the Boston Globe, and I arrived there in the summer of 2001, the Boston Globe had done a lot of work on a previous case of a priest in the city of Fall River who had been accused of abuse. And they went at that story very hard. They did a lot of work on that story. But they were never able to determine that the cardinal or the entire Catholic hierarchy in the archdiocese was aware of that abuse and allowed it to happen. But they had done so much coverage that it gave the impression that they were on a crusade. And so they were concerned that it would appear like they were on a crusade again, because at that time there was a lot of concern on the part of Catholics in Boston that they were just on a vendetta. And so they didn't want to go down that path again. And they were concerned that if we did this investigation, that it would create the impression that we were just launching another crusade.
Next
Would you?
question, yeah.
It seems stories about the individual abuse cases could be also meaningful and interesting to many readers. However, you told journalists to look at the system, the institution, the practice, and the policy, not the individuals. To me, that was the most impressive scene in the movie. What made you say that at that moment?
Because up till that point, there had been previous cases of priests who had been abused, who had been accused of abusing children. There had been a book written about it, actually more than one book written about this. That's pointed out in the movie itself. And so I did not want this to be a story saying that, that instead of one case, there were just lots of cases of this. It would look very sensationalist in my view. And it did not really get at the key issue. And the key issue was not how many priests have abused children. The key issue was, what did the church do when it discovered that priests had abused children? What did it do when it discovered that priests had abused many children? And why did it allow this kind of behavior to persist? And that's what I felt was the key story, and that's why I didn't want to just go with a story that said there were large numbers of priests who had abused children, because that wasn't the full story.
Go ahead, please.
When you decided to fight against the Catholic Church, there were pressures from everywhere. How did you stand so strong in that situation?
Well, I'm not sure that I was entirely aware of all the pressures at the time, because I was new to the community and I didn't really know that many people in the community. So not that many people were coming directly to me with those pressures. And so I certainly knew the implications of the story that we were pursuing. I knew that it was particularly sensitive. And, over the first full year, we published 600 stories. So at some point, there were Catholics in the community who felt that we were doing too much, that we should let it go, that we had done enough, that we'd made our point. But my view is that we needed to tell the full story. And my view is that that's our job. We're journalists. We're supposed to tell the full story. And I don't care what the pressures are. In fact, the more powerful the institution, the more important that we tell the story. The notion that we should run from a story or drop a story simply because an institution is powerful, to me, just makes absolutely no sense. It's more reason to do the story in the first place.
Okay, do you have another question?
Everyone knows investigative journalism is great, but it is hard to do. Time, money, and courage should be invested. What does the Post do to encourage investigative reporting in the newsroom?
Well, we have an investigative unit at the Post. It's been there for a long time, and there are about 8 people on that team. So it's very similar to the Spotlight team. But we also recognize that every journalist should be an investigative journalist. When somebody stumbles across wrongdoing, when they discover that there's a bigger story, when there's been a cover-up, when there's been fraud, when there's been any kind of wrongdoing whatsoever, every reporter has an obligation to pursue that story. And so we expect that every reporter should be an investigative reporter. Now, they may need to work with people in the investigative unit, they may need to work with other reporters and other editors, but we should never let a good story go unpursued.
Number 4?
Yeah.
The
No, yeah, right.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. The Post strategies focusing on digital readers have been very successful. How big was Jeff Bezos' influence? Do you think the Post could survive better since Bezos?
Well, his influence on us has been tremendous. He's had a tremendous impact on us. He's been a great owner. Early on, when he bought us, he indicated that he wanted us to develop a national strategy to become a national newspaper and maybe even an international newspaper. And in order to do that, we needed to be fully digital. This gave us an opportunity to reach people throughout the country and actually throughout the world. So right from the beginning, he was in deep conversations with us about what we might do to reach a national audience, and also importantly to reach younger people, because if we did not cultivate a younger audience, we would not have readership in the future. So working with him, we developed a lot of different ideas, and he's given us financial capital to explore those ideas, to pursue those ideas, and so-called runway, which is to say time, to let those ideas play out. But perhaps just as important as the financial capital he's provided us is the intellectual capital that he's provided us, the ideas, the know-how. He's not just knowledgeable about technology, but he's also very knowledgeable about consumer behavior. And so both of those are very important, and his depth of experience has been very valuable to us.
Do you consider your international readers when you make editorial decisions?
Well, when we make decisions, we don't decide who's going to read it. Really, we decide, is it an important story to be pursued. Fortunately, we do have a lot of international readers. Something about like a fifth of our readers overall are overseas, particularly concentrated in English language countries. But we really don't think through how are people internationally going to view this. We just think through, is it a good story and should we pursue it? And many of the stories that are of interest to Americans are also of interest to people overseas.
I'm going to backtrack now at the beginning of that question. Could you tell me more about the Post's digital strategies? What are the core principles regarding that?
I think the core principles are that there is a new medium that has emerged. People started learning how to write for newspapers, and you write for newspapers in a certain way. Along comes radio. You don't do radio the same way that you do newspapers. Along comes television. You don't do television the way that you do radio and the way you do newspapers. Now we have the web, and it has brought forth new storytelling forms, and we have to recognize that it is a medium of its own. It's a distinct medium, and so we need to develop new storytelling forms for the web, and that's really what we've done. And I think now with mobile devices, particularly the smartphone, that's probably its own distinct medium as well, and we need to think separately about that. So fundamental to our approach has been a recognition that new mediums have emerged, and we can't tell stories exactly the way we did in the past.
Some journalists who are used to working for print might still struggle to adjust to the digital environment. How did the Post journalists adjust to the changes?
Well, it took time to adjust to the changes, obviously. But I think it's important that people such as myself speak honestly, forthrightly with people on our staff, talk to them about how information consumption habits are changing, how people are absorbing news in very different ways, and urge them to be successful at it. Because if we're not successful, then somebody else will be successful. And I think it's important that we be the ones who prevail in this environment. And so you have to have honest conversations with people about that. And so that's really what we ought to be doing, is having those kinds of honest conversations. And I think over time, people came to understand what they needed to do. We also hired a lot of people who had grown up as journalists solely within a web environment. They had never written for newspapers before. We hired quite a few of them, and they demonstrated that they could attract a very large audience on the web with different storytelling forms. And I think people in our newsroom then looked at that, and they learned from what their colleagues were doing, and they came to appreciate why that was working and why it was necessary.
How about you? Are you good at using digital devices?
Am I what? Good at what?
Using digital devices such as smartphone and tablet?
Well, I use a smartphone,
Yeah.
and I use a laptop, and I use a computer, and I use a tablet. I'm not a technology expert by any means, and I'm on certain social media outlets, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, but on other social media venues, I don't participate. I'm not typically on Reddit, I'm not typically on Snapchat, I'm not typically on Instagram. A little bit, but not much.
Number 7?
Yep.
Who do you think is the biggest competitor to the Post at this moment or in the future? The New York Times, BuzzFeed, Facebook?
Yes, all of them. They're all competitors to ours. I'm not sure I would rank them, but we have more competitors than ever. So Facebook is a competitor, Google is a competitor, Twitter is a competitor. Why? Because that's where readers go first, in many cases, to get their information, and also because Facebook, Google, and Twitter are competing for the same advertisers that we have. At the same time, you have new digitally oriented media outlets like BuzzFeed and Huffington Post that have emerged over the years. They're very aggressive, they're very smart about what they're doing digitally, and so they represent serious competition for us. And at the same time, you have the New York Times, which is one of our more traditional competitors. We've been a competitor of theirs for quite some time, but we are the most like the New York Times. They are the most like us. And so, but we both, the New York Times and the Washington Post and many other news organizations, have developed a very powerful presence online, and we've become very smart about what we're doing online, and so now we're competing with each other as well. So I think it's very difficult to rank our competitors. The reality is that we have a lot of competitors, and we have more competitors than ever.
Number 8?
Yep.
Technological development has brought fundamental changes to society and also journalism. People talk about robot journalism now. What might be the best strategy human journalists should develop?
I think some of the traditional skills work really well here. And the reality is that having a good idea, knowing which stories to pursue and knowing how to pursue them, knowing how to write, knowing how to produce, all of those skills are still absolutely essential to our success. I don't think a robot is going to be able to deliver what readers want. A smart idea goes a very long way.
Social media is called a double-edged sword because of the benefits and risks they provide. Critics say social media are leading the trend of light and trivial news, while in-depth stories hardly go viral. What approach does the Post have toward social media?
Well, I'm not sure I accept the premise of the question that stories on social media have to be trivial. We see many serious stories do extremely well on social media. People are keenly interested. And social media is just a way for people to share stories that interest them with other people and have other people see that, and then they can decide whether they want to read it or not. So I don't believe that social media has led to the trivialization of news by any means. That said, we do have what's called an audience engagement team at the Post. Like many news organizations, we have a group of people who are responsible for making sure that our stories are disseminated through social media, and that we really understand how Facebook works, that we understand how Google search works, that we understand how Twitter works, that we understand how Reddit works, and Instagram, and Pinterest, and message apps work, and all of these sorts of things. And that we become sophisticated in that, and that we use those to best advantage to let people know what kinds of stories and what kind of journalism is appearing in the Washington Post.
What do you think is the biggest problem of current journalism practice? Lack of objectivity or accuracy? Sensationalism? Lack of investigative journalism?
None of those, actually. I think the most serious failing of journalists these days is fear of being criticized, self-censorship, essentially, where they're afraid to offend people. They feel that they'll be saddled with a label of being liberal or conservative. They're fearful of losing advertisers. They're fearful of offending powerful interests. I think the greatest threat to journalism comes from ourselves, our own fear of the consequences. And I think it's most important that we overcome that fear.
The American media industry is suffering. Particularly newspapers are decreasing and many journalists are losing their jobs. What do you see in 10 years or 20 years? Where should we find a hope? What should we do to save journalism?
Well, that's a difficult question. It's not just in the United States that journalism is suffering. It's suffering in many countries, particularly in the developed world. In the developing world, traditional newspapers generally are still doing okay, but in the developed world, they face a lot of challenges from the internet. And so I'm an optimist because I think that we're more resilient than people expected us to be. I think that people predicted our death a long time ago, and here we are today. We're still alive. We're still setting the journalistic agenda, and I think that we are reinventing ourselves. And I think it's very important that we come in every day to work thinking that we can succeed at what we do. I think it would be impossible. We could never succeed if we came into work every day thinking that we were going to fail. And we have to be optimists. And I think there's reason for that optimism. I think that we have shown ourselves to be more resilient than people expected, and that we even expected of ourselves. So we just have to keep experimenting a lot, trying a lot of different things, seeing what works, being willing to let those experiments play out for a period of time to see if they're working, monitor them all the time, see what's working, see what's not working, see what kinds of adjustments we can make. And I think we'll ultimately come to an answer. There will be journalism. There's a need for journalism in the world, in my view. And so the model will be reinvented. And fortunately, we have a lot of new people coming into our field, young people coming into our field with new ideas. And we need them. We should embrace them. And we should listen to the kinds of ideas that they have.
Last question on the paper. Going back to the news industry, while most news organizations are struggling to survive, what might be a sustainable new business model?
Well, I don't think we know exactly what the new sustainable business model is. It hasn't yet been invented. If it had been invented, we would all be rushing to adopt it for ourselves, and we would all replicate it. But it hasn't yet been invented. And so right now we're all working on that. And so it would be presumptuous of me and risky of me to suggest that one exists today, because I think this is something that we all continue to work on.
Okay. I have one more question. It's a little bit personal. Can I?
Sure.
Yeah. What do you do while you are not working?
Well, I'm never not entirely working. I'm always working to some degree. It's the nature of the business. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week business. But, I'm with friends, have dinner, go to a movie. I like to cycle. I like cycling on bikes. And so I do that. And I have a little place in the country in western Massachusetts, and I go there periodically, and I go on long hikes. I read, things like that.
Have you ever turned off your cell phone?
Have I ever turned off my iPhone?
Yeah.
Only on the plane when they tell me to.
On the vacation? What, during the vacation?
On the vacation, have I ever turned off a smartphone?
Yeah.
No, never.
No.
I'd like to get a photo of the two of you in front of the banner.
Okay,
if you
Okay,
yeah.
sure.
could.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I turned it off now for your interview.
Yeah.